Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Dear students, in today's discussion, we are going to talk about language, thought, and culture. You need to remember that this is just a cursory explanation of the topic in hand and not a deep engagement with the topic. We'll be having many more lectures on this very same topic, right? Where we'll be properly talking about thought, or what we mean by thought, and you see it consists of a number of, you may say, factors, such as memory and inference. So we'll be talking about memory and inference, and then various theories of thought formation, that how our thoughts formed in our mind. For example, the prototype theory and the critical feature theory, right? So we'll be having detailed discussions on the concept of thought, right? Also, we'll be relating it with culture in the forthcoming lectures, inshallah. In today's topic, we'll be primarily dealing with linguistic determinism and linguistic relativity, right? In other words, you may say we'll be dealing with the sapir-whorf hypothesis. Here are certain questions in hand, as we usually pose certain questions by the beginning of each lecture and physical classes. Here are a few questions we will be, you see, trying to find answers to. The questions include: number one, does language determine thought? That is the basic question for today's lecture. Does language determine thought? Yes, no question, right? If the answer comes out to be yes, then again another question arises, that to what extent and in what ways does language determine thought, right? The answer may come out to be no, but definitely it will come out to be yes. But the extent and the ways in which language determines thought, that is what we are going to have a detailed discussion on. Then another question is, are thoughts totally determined by language, or can thoughts stay independent of language? This is to do with linguistic determinism and linguistic relativity. And the final one, what are the other factors which may influence thought? So these are the questions we'll try to find answers to. Starting with the, you see, very basic concept of linguistic determinism, or when you say the questions we just used earlier, does language determine thought? This question basically, there are certain controversies, and this is, you see, still under debates, and there are arguments on both the sides. But I believe that without adding further fuel to the debate, we should, you see, go with the already existing theories, and we'll come up with our own conclusion later on. Right? So, most majority of the people, they believe that yes, language does determine thought, right? By this I mean that the way we think, the way we you see, perceive the world around us, the way we experience the world, right, throughout our life. So all these experiences and all these perceptions, they are determined by language. But to what extent are they totally determined by language, or are they determined by language up to some extent, up to a considerable extent? And is there only language, or I mean, are there any other factors also which determine language? These are the questions in hand, remember, right? So in this regard, a number of experiments have been conducted to prove that whether or not language determines thought, or in what ways or to what extent does language determine thought. The very first experience to discuss here is the experiment conducted by Susan Irwin Tripp. And in that experiment, the researcher collected data from, you see, certain Japanese women. They were ladies who were basically from Japan, and they had immigrated to the US after World War II. And they were engaged in certain psychological experiments, because we may come to know about the relationship between language and culture, language and thought, by a number of by using a number of research tools, such as interviews, or questionnaires, maybe they are field work, or there may be psychological experiments. So this is one of the socio-psychological experiments, remember. In this experiment, the subjects of the study were asked certain questions. They were engaged in certain psychological experiments, and one of those experiments or tasks was the sentence completion task. They were asked to complete a sentence, right? And the sentence was, I like to read, and then they were supposed to complete this sentence. So, but the point was that they were asked this sentence or this question in two languages, in the Japanese language first, which was their mother tongue, and then in the English language. These were the ladies who had, you say, basically, as I said earlier, they were basically from Japan, and after the World War II, they had immigrated to the US, and they had lived the rest of their life there. First of all, they were engaged in a conversation in the Japanese language, and then you see they were that conversation was followed by this sentence completion task. Later on, they were engaged in a conversation in the English language, and again that conversation was followed by the same task, the sentence completion task, right? But you see, when they were asked in the Japanese language, what did they want to read? So they said that they wanted to read about sociology because we're going to talk about the reason later on, right? They wanted to read about sociology. On the other hand, remember when you see they were asked in the, let me pick up a pointer from here. Uh, Right. So when they were asked the same question in the English language after you see being engaged in a conversation in the English language, their answer was surprisingly different, right? They said that they wanted to read about comics because comics could relax their mind. Why was it? Why was it so? Why did they come up with different choices when they were asked the same question in different languages? Here is a point we need to remember. The point is about linguistic determinism, remember. When they were asked in the Japanese language the same question, right? So the researcher argued that the researcher argues that they when they were engaged in a conversation in the Japanese language, right, in their mother tongue, I mean, the language of the place or the speech community which they had left behind after World War II before immigrating to the US. So when they were engaged in a conversation in the Japanese language and they were asked this question in the Japanese language, right? They said that they wanted to ask about sociology. Why? Because such a conversation, I mean, a conversation in their mother tongue might have evoked certain thoughts related to their own society, related to the Japanese culture, right? So maybe that is the reason that they wanted to read about sociology. On the other hand, when the same question was asked in the English language after a conversation in the English language, right? So they said that they wanted to ask about, to read about comics because comics could relax their mind. The point which the researcher mentions is that maybe when they were engaged in a conversation in the English language and then they were asked for their choice of reading, so the English language might have evoked kind of traumatic thoughts in their mind, right? Because when a person leaves, when a person has to leave his or her own hometown and to immigrate to another country, particularly to a country or a state the people of which have imposed a war on their motherland, so definitely these people must have gone through certain traumatic situations, right? Maybe that might have been the reason that when they were asked the same question in the English language, they said that they wanted to read about comics because they could relax their mind, right? So, what the researcher concludes from this experiment is that these two languages, conversations and questions in two languages evoked different thoughts in their mind and they came up with different choices, right? So it up to some extent proves linguistic determinism or the questions we just posed previously, that how does language determine thought, or does whether or not language determines thought, right? Whether or not language determines thought. So the answer comes out to be yes here, because as we see in this experiment, when they were asked the same question in two different languages, so the participants of the study, there were different thoughts which got activated in their mind, and that is why they came with different answers, with different choices. So in this experiment, as we can see, uh, different languages determined their thoughts differently. That is why we may conclude so far that yes, language determines thoughts, right? Language determines the way we think. The language determines the way language shapes or determines it influences the way we think about the language, the world around us, right? The way we perceive the world around us, or the way we experience the world, right? So this is the conclusion so far, though later on we'll talk about linguistic determinism and linguistic relativity to answer question number 2 and the remaining questions also. Having proved that language determines thought, right? Let's move to the most well-known theory with regard to linguistic determinism, or with regard to the influence of language on mind or thought. The theory is known as the sapir-whorf hypothesis, which was proposed by the hypothesis was actually proposed by Edward Sapir and his student Benjamin Lewolf, right? Uh, this hypothesis actually has got two versions. Initially it was linguistic determinism, and later on they came up with the relaxed version, or kind of weak version of the hypothesis, which is known as linguistic relativity, right? So let's start with the first one, linguistic determinism. As I said, remember, it is said to be the strong version and the initial version of linguistic of the Sapir-Whorf hypothesis, right? These words are self-explanatory, the terms. Let's first try to understand the terminology. Linguistic determinism, right? Language determines thought. In simple words, it means that language determines thoughts, linguistic determinism, right? The strong version of this hypothesis, linguistic determinism, states that language determines thoughts. I mean, the way we think, the way we perceive the world around us, it is totally determined by language, right? As mentioned by Hudson, one is incapable of understanding a concept for which the language has no name. I mean, all our thoughts, whatever we have in our mind, all the concepts which exist in our mind, they are actually shaped and they are determined. These concepts are formed by certain linguistic items, by words, by language. I mean, right? If there is no word for a word, if there is no word for a concept in our mind, that concept cannot exist at all. That is what linguistic determinism believes. Remember, so there is no thought without language. Uh, Remember, linguistic determinism, it is a very controversial notion in the field of sociolinguistics, in the field of cognitive linguistics, linguistic anthropology, and anthropological linguistics, right? And still, it is under debate, remember. Um, let's read it. The language we speak limits or determines the concepts we can understand and express. For example, the prominent figures of this field, linguistics, right, or linguistic determinism, they argue that speakers of languages without a specific color term, such as blue, would have difficulty perceiving or conceptualizing that color, right? It means that concepts cannot stand without language. They cannot be formed. They do not exist in our mind without language. That's as simple as that, right? Linguistic determinism. Here are a few examples. Uh, we have got grammatical gender, and remember, grammatical gender varies across languages, right? For example, in the German language, the sun is feminine, while the moon is masculine, and the case is completely the other way around in the Spanish language. Same is the case with Urdu and Pashto. Also in the Urdu language as well as in the Pashto language, the sun is considered to be masculine, while the moon is considered to be feminine, right? Remember, it does have some influence on the way we think, the way we perceive the way around us, the world around us, right? How does it influence? If you, for example, if you ask a German person to describe the sun and the moon, so the German person will definitely say that, because you see, the sun is considered to be feminine in the German language, so they will associate stereotypically feminine characteristics with the sun, such as it's innocent, it's pretty, it's beautiful, right? Kind of empty adjectives they will start using. On the other hand, if you if you ask a German person to describe the moon. So they, since moon is considered to be masculine, or it has got masculine gender in the German language, that is why the German people associate stereotypically masculine characteristics with the moon. Like they may say that it's strong, it's harsh, or I mean the concepts we the Urdu speakers and Pashto speakers, we associate these concepts with the sun on the other hand, right? Contrary to the German language, in the Spanish language as well as Urdu and Pashto, right? The sun is considered to be masculine, while the moon is considered to be feminine. Remember, so if you ask a Pakistani person or a Spanish speaking person, an Urdu speaking person or a Pashto speaking person to describe the moon, so they will associate typically the feminine characteristics such as it's innocent, it's pretty, it's soft. On the other hand, they may describe the sun as something to be very harsh or cruel, brutality, or cruelty, harshness. You see, rigidity. These are the concepts which are usually associated with the word sun in the Urdu language, Spanish, and Pashto. Remember, so you see, it's since there are the grammatical genders vary across these languages. That is why the speakers of these languages experience the world, and they um, you see, think about the world, they perceive the world in different ways. The German people perceive the worlds and the concepts of sun and the moon differently than the Spanish speakers, the Urdu speakers, and the Pashto speakers do, remember. So again, it proves linguistic determinism that yes, language determines thought. Language does determine thought because the language we speak actually shapes the way we think about the world, right? Here is another example. um, Languages have got, or languages vary across color spectrums, right? um, for example, there are certain languages around the globe, remember, in which there are very few number words for a limited number of words for colors, and there are then certain languages which have got a very, you see, great number of words for different colors. If let's take the example of the Russian language and the English language on the other hand. In the English language, we have got the word blue only for the blue color, be that the light blue or the dark blue, but we have got a single term, the single name that is blue. In the Russian language, on the other hand, there are two words which refer to these different shades of the blue color, right? Such as for the light blue color, they have got the word guluboy. On the other hand, now they have got a different word for the dark blue color, right? So if remember, it's not only the difference of words, it's rather the difference in the way they think about the world around them. Like the brain of people who use different words for dark blue and light blue, just as the Russian people, right? When they are shown these colors, right, and when these words are uttered in front of them, so their mind and rather their brain, because in cognitive linguistics, even in neurolinguistics, a number of experiments have been conducted in this regard. So when these different colors and these names are presented to the speakers of such languages who have got different words for dark blue and light blue, their mind and their brain actually give a kind of surprising reaction to these different colors, to the light and blue or dark, light and dark, right? On the other hand, people having the same names for these various colors, light and blue, their minds, on the other hand, do not. Their mind, on the other hand, does not show any surprising reaction because they're not considered to be different. So again, it proves that the language we speak determines the way we think about the world, right? So this is all about linguistic determinism so far. Language determines thoughts, language determines the way we think, language determines the way we perceive the world around us, right? Moving to linguistic relativity, remember, linguistic determinism, and here is no empirical evidence to support that. We are going to discuss a number of experiments to prove linguistic determinism is, you see, not a reliable thing, a concept, right? A number of experiments we are going to prove it. But for your general understanding, as I said earlier, that according to linguistic determinism, thoughts are totally determined by language and they cannot stand without language, right? But there are certain concepts which do stand without language. For example, look at the concept of horizontal and vertical. The concept of horizontal, and the concept of vertical. Look at young kids, young children. They do have this concept in their mind. I mean, they can perceive when something is vertical, something is in a vertical position, and something is in a horizontal position. During the first few, the first, you see, a few weeks or months of their lives when they cannot use language, but they do have this concept in their mind. Remember the concept of horizontal and vertical, right? Having no words in their mind. So it means that these concepts do exist in their mind. Same as the concept of motherhood. Look at young kids. By nature, I mean, that is something God gifted or genetic in human beings, not only in human beings, rather in all living organisms, I believe. Look at human beings, right? Young kids do have this concept of motherhood. I mean, when they are close to their mother, they have got different kind of, they show different kind of behavior, and when they are away from their mother, so they show them different behavior. So this kind of concept of motherhood also, or the concept of intimacy, we may say, it also exists in their mind without having words for these concepts in their mind, right? So again, it proves that thoughts may exist without language also. There are certain concepts which may exist in the minds of individuals, human beings, without having names or linguistic items in their mind to refer to those concepts. So again, here we may disagree with linguistic determinism, right? Remember, majority of the experts and practitioners of cognitive linguistics, particularly and sociolinguists, linguistic anthropologists, these people disagree with linguistic determinism. They completely, though it may not be straight away rejected completely, but still, I mean, its reliability is something debatable. Remember, the second version of the sapir-whorf hypothesis is known as linguistic relativity, and it states that language influences our thoughts and perceptions, but does not entirely determine them. Right? Language does influence the way we think. Language does influence the way we perceive the world around us, but it does not entirely determine thoughts and concepts. Remember, right? I mean, concepts and thoughts may exist without language. Also, they may exist without language. Also, right? Up to some extent, I do not mean that they exist without language completely. Thoughts are definitely influenced by language, remember, right? But not completely. That is the basic point. Or we may say that thoughts are largely determined by language. To put it in simple words, right? Thoughts are largely determined by language. When look at the word largely, and let's compare it with the word totally, right? Thoughts are totally determined by language. That is linguistic determinism. And when we say that the thoughts are largely influenced by language, or thoughts are largely influenced by language, then I mean, some sort of subjectivity is there, or there is a room for discussion or debate, because when we say that thoughts are largely influenced by language, so by largely we mean that up to a great extent, but not totally, remember, not totally. So that is why this is called the weak version of the sapir-whorf hypothesis, and that is what we mean by linguistic relativity. That thoughts may be relative, right? They may not, because had it been the case that I mean, if we abide by linguistic determinism, right? So then all the speakers of a language speaking the same language, they may think alike then. But thoughts are different. Remember, they vary from person to person. They are relative. They are never absolute. The way, for example, think of the main gate of your house. Think of the main gate of your house. You people are listening to me right now. One person among you may be having a blue gate in their mind, another person may be having a gray colored gate, right? Multiple colors may be there. Focus on the direction. The gate in your mind, it may be facing the west, the east, the south, or the north. It means that think of any other concept. Think of, let's suppose, your elder brother, think of your parents, think of your family members, think of cousin, think of your childhood, think of your school principal, right? So the term is the same. We all speak the same language. I mean, you and I, right now, we are using the English language. So but if we abide by linguistic determinism, then it should have been the case that the same word should activate the very same concept in the minds of all the listeners, but that is not happening right now, right? Different concepts are you see getting associated with the words I'm uttering right now, right? So it means that linguistic determinism is not a reliable concept, remember, right? And thoughts are not completely determined by language, and there is relativity. Linguistic relativity is there, right? So language can shape our thinking up to some extent, but it does not entirely constrain or limit it, contrary to linguistic determinism, right? Which states that the language we speak limits or determines the concepts we can understand and express. On the other hand, in linguistic relativity, language can shape our thinking to some extent, but it does not entirely constrain or limit our thinking, remember, right? In this regard, you see, to prove linguistic relativity and to go against linguistic determinism, a number of experiments have been conducted. But we are going to focus only on one experimental project, and in which a few experiments have been conducted. We are going to talk about specifically the verb of handling technique experiment, the trade sort and task, and then another version of the trade sort and task, right? The verb of handling technique focus on the verb of handling. What do we mean by this? The verb of handling. We use verbs for handing over something to somebody. For example, hand it over to me, give it to me, right? Pass it to me. A number of words we use for verb of handling. Remember, this experiment was conducted on two speech communities, right? The English speaking community, there were participants from both the communities, right, in this experiment. The English speaking community and participants from the Navajo speaking community, right? I mean, what was done in the experiment? There were basically three objects given to the research participants, people, to the subjects of the study, those who participate in the study, right? Speakers from the English speaking community and from the other speaking community. They were given these three objects: a string, a stick, and a piece of cloth. We know that these objects, they vary in terms of their shape, right? Um, like a string is flexible. On the other hand, a stick is rigid, while a piece of cloth is also flexible. And same as against with length also. A string and a stick, they are long, while a piece of cloth has got a flat structure. Now, what were the participants supposed to do? They were just supposed to use verbs of handling for these three different objects, right? And the results of the study showed that the English speaking community used the very same verb of handling for all these three different objects, such as hand it over to me or give it to me, right? On the other hand, the Naval speaking community, they use different verbs of handling for all these three objects when they were given a string which had got a different shape, so they used a different verb of handling. When they were given a different they were given a different object, a stick, so the verb of handling they used was different, right? And the same was the case with the verb of handling used for for a piece of cloth, right? From this experiment, the researchers concluded that the Navajo speaking community preferred shape over color, right? I mean, it's their language. Their language have trained them in such a way that they prefer shape. right? And it up to some extent proves linguistic determinism also, that the language we speak actually shapes the way we think about the world around us, right? But let's move ahead to further talk about linguistic relativity, that how do we move from linguistic determinism to linguistic relativity, right? So far the results of this experiment, you see, approve or they go in accordance with linguistic determinism. Another experiment was conducted in the very same project, and that was known as the traits sorting task, right? By the sorting task, it is meant that when, like usually two objects are given to participants, and then they are asked to give to you see pick up another object, a third object, and to relate that third object to the two objects they have already been given. But the point is that the objects vary in terms of their colors, in terms of their sizes, in terms of their shapes, right? And the participants in such psychological experiments, they may either you see opt for the color, the shape, or the size. So in this experiment also, the two again participants from the two from the those two speech communities, I mean the Navajo speaking community and the English speaking community, they were given certain objects, right, which differed from one another in terms of shape, sizes, and colors. For example, these two objects, they are similar in terms of size, sorry, in terms of shape, as well as in terms of their color. Now, these two objects are similar in terms of their color, but they're different in terms of their shape as well as in terms of their size. The square has got a larger size as compared to this triangle, right? Again, these two objects, they are similar in terms of color, but they're different in terms of their size as well as in terms of their shape. One of them is square, another is a triangle. One of them is, the square is smaller than the triangle. So when these participants were given these objects and they were asked to relate these objects to one another, right? What did the Navajo speaking people do? They again is resulted from the previous experiment that Navajo speaking community prefer sharp. So again here also the Navajo speaking community related these objects to one another in terms of the shape of these objects. Like they related, you see the circular shaped object to the circular one, the triangular shaped object to the triangular shaped object, and the square shaped object to the the square shaped object to the square shaped object, and the triangular object to the triangular object on the other hand. So they preferred, again, it further proves the results of the previous experiment. But what was new about this experiment was that the results showed that the English speaking people preferred color in this experiment. Like they related all these objects in terms of their color, right? They related the green color with the green colored object, regardless of the shape of these objects and regardless of the sizes of these objects, right? And same was the case with, you see, the color red also, and the color blue. So they related all these objects in terms of their color, neither in terms of their size nor in terms of their shape, right? So to conclude it so far from these two experiments, the Navajo speaking community in these experiments preferred shape, right? On the other hand, the English speaking people preferred color over shape, right? Focus on point number two. The English speaking people preferred color over shape, right? Now, according to linguistic determinism, language determines thought, right? So if a person speaks the English language, and is this experiment showed that the English speaking community, or the English speaking people preferred color over shape. So same should be the case with all English speakers, that all of them should prefer color over shape, right? But in order to you see prove this and to further you see, to add reliability to the results of this experiment and to distinguish the influence of language over thought, then the influence of color over culture over thought, right? Another experiment was conducted, and that was also a continuation of the traits sought in task, and it was part of the same project, remember. Again, in this experiment, two English speech communities were taken. Participants from, I mean, but the participants were selected from two different speech speaking people, two different English speaking communities. Both of them were different communities, but remember, both of them were similar in the sense that both of them were the English speaking people. I mean, members of both the groups, right? Boston English speaking middle class people and Harlem English speaking lower class people. The difference lied here in the social class which these people belong to, right? A difference lied in the social class of these people. Both of them were English speaking people, remember, but the difference lied in the social class which these people belong to. Now, again, they were also asked to relate such objects in terms of either their shape or their size, right? uh, uh, Now, as we discussed previously, that in the previous experiment, in this experiment, the English speaking people or the participants of the English speaking community preferred shape over color, right? Sorry, preferred color over shape. Now, again, here also, the English people in this experiment should have also preferred color, right? Like all of them should have related these objects in terms of their you see, color, not in terms of their shape, right? Because both of them were the English speaking communities. Participants of both these groups were the English speaking people, remember. But the results were completely astonishing, because the Boston English speaking people who belong to the middle class families, they preferred shape over color. I mean, they related those objects to one another in terms of their shape. On the other hand, the Harlem speaking people, who belong to the lower class families, they related those objects in terms of their color, not in terms of their shape. So the results of this study were, they were completely opposite to this experiment, the first great sort and task experiment, where the English speaking community, I mean, the English speaking people community preferred color, right? They were different in the sense that right here in this experiment, also in the second paired sort and task experiment, the English people should have also preferred color, right? But the case was different in the sense that the middle class English speaking people, who were actually the Boston English speaking people, they preferred sharp over color, right? So what did the researchers conclude from this experiment? They concluded that uh, it was not only language, right, which determined the thoughts of these two different groups of participants. Rather, it was socialization also, right? The researchers, they argue that since the Boston English speaking community, these people belong to the middle class people, right? They were the middle class people, and we know that the English speaking, sorry, the middle class people can afford to provide toys to their kids, right? On the other hand, lower class people cannot afford to provide toys to their kids. Now, toys are usually distinguished in terms of their shape, not in terms of their color. Think about young kids at your home. They may have got a car, a toy car, a toy car. I mean, they may have a doll, a gun, a soldier, or I mean any other sort of toy. A toy may be there, but those toys are distinguished not in terms of their color, because they may be having all those toys of the same color, either red or black or blue, whatever color that is. But they never consider all those toys to be the same. Why? Because toys are distinguished in terms of their shape from one another. A bed has got a different shape, while a car has got a different shape, right? So since toys are distinguished from one another in terms of their shape, and middle class people can afford to provide toys to their kid, that is why that might have been the reason, according to the researchers, that the Boston English speaking participants, they were the English, they were the middle class people, so they preferred shape over color, right? So it proves, remember, what we can conclude from this experiment is that It's not only language only which determines our thought, because had it been the case, then all these participants, I mean participants of both these groups, regardless of their social class, would have preferred color, is it was proven by the previous experiment, right? But since it's not only language, though both of them, both the members of participants of both these groups, they were the English speaking people, but they didn't think alike. I mean, the way they perceived the world, it wasn't the same, right? It was different rather, because the middle class people, right? They preferred shape over color. They didn't relate those objects to one another in terms of their color. So what the researcher concludes from this experiment is that it's not only language which determines the way we think, the way we perceive the world around us, rather it's socialization also. You see, the middle class people get socialized differently than the people of the lower class families do, right? So that is the reason that these people belonging to different social classes think differently. And again, as the results of this experiment showed that the middle class people thought differently. They actually, you see, they you see preferred shape. They related those objects in terms of their shape and not in terms of their color, right? So to conclude rather the entire discussion, in today's lecture we talked about linguistic determinism and linguistic relativity. Linguistic determinism means that language determines thought, language shapes the way we think, right? And it also means that thoughts are totally determined by language, and thoughts, concepts, they cannot stand without language, right? On the other hand, linguistic relativity states that thoughts are largely determined by language. They are influenced by language, but not totally determined by language, because they may stand without language also. Or we may say that it's not only language which shapes or influences the way we think, rather several other factors are also there. They may also play an important role, a vital role, in determining the way we shape, the way we think about the world, the way we perceive the world around us. And one of those factors so far, the discussion shows so far that one of those factors is socialization. It's not only the language we speak that determines the way we think, rather it's the way we get socialized, right? So the way we get socialized also determines the way we think, the way we perceive the world around us, right? In today's discussion, we talked about linguistic relativity, linguistic determinism. In the coming class, inshallah, in the coming lecture, we'll be having a detailed discussion on thought, speech, and inference, right? Thought, then inside thought, we have got um, you see inference and memory. We have got concepts and propositions. Propositions consist of concepts, right? How are concepts formed in our mind? There are various theories for that, and we will also, you see, talk about a number of other topics related to the relationship between language, culture, and thought, right? We'll talk about culture in detail also, the various, I mean, type of knowledge, cultural knowledge, non-cultural knowledge, and we'll talk about the way different people belonging to different culture perceive the way around them, and the way people belonging to different cultures use language. So we'll in culture also in the forthcoming lecture. Stay tuned, stay home, stay safe. Allah Hafiz.